Now, Peter Hitchens and I have been talking now for the best part of probably 3 to 4 months, I would imagine. When we started, we were disagreeing about why the lockdown was necessary. Nowadays, we agree on more than we disagree on. And I know that he, like me, will be astonished to see the picture on the pages 10 and 11 of the Times this morning, in which an Italian army plane appears to be flying over a beach in Tuscany, checking out to make sure people are not coming out from under their sun umbrellas. It's quite an extraordinary picture. Peter, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
I don't know whether you've seen this picture in the Times.
Yes, I did.
It's kind of chilling, isn't it?
Well, yes, and of course it's a sign of the huge extension of state control of private lives.
Yeah.
The idea that the state should be remotely interested in the way in which we arrange our corpulent bodies on beaches is just beyond belief to someone like me who grew up in a world where such a thing would be comical.
Well, exactly.
I suppose one can only hope that the Italian army remains as inefficient as it has legendarily always been.
Yeah, but it struck me, looking at it, that it's not a million miles away from somebody with a rifle just kind of picking you off as you try and sort of make your way to the hot dog stand.
If they start shooting people for getting out of line on beaches, then we really are at the end of civilization. I mean, I think that's a bit of a jump, though. We haven't quite got... That's half the problem with what's going on. It's not serious enough to frighten people. Right. And I think my side should now perhaps adopt the view of the government. We need to frighten people more to get them to realise how serious what's going on is. You remember that the extraordinary SAGE document back on March the 22nd, in which the government experts said a substantial number of people still do not feel sufficiently personally threatened.
Yeah.
The perceived level of personal threat needs to be increased among those who are complacent using hard-hitting emotional messaging. The following day, the day after that piece of advice was delivered, they shut down the economy and introduced mass house arrest. And it's all been based on fear. And very effective it is too. People in huge masses are afraid of something which isn't really a menace to them. Well, they're not afraid of something which is the invasion of their privacy and of their personal freedom, and indeed the takeover of the state by effectively a very small body of people, unaccountable, shortly to move into a special space-age office in the Cabinet Office, completely uncontrolled by Parliament, completely unrestrained by the judiciary. We are effectively living in a country which is turning into an autocracy. While I am absolutely not an apologist for Mr. Lukashenko in Belarus, it seems quite funny for everyone to getting so pious about his obviously rigged elections and his repression, as we in our own country head towards our own version of an unfree, lawless, autocratic state.
Well, indeed, and as I saw a piece, I can't remember exactly where I saw it. It might have been the Mail this morning, that only one in 7 people in the Cabinet Office is actually at work in an office. It's hardly surprising that they're not encouraging anybody else.
I don't want them. People always used to say, complain about MPs going on holiday, and I would say, for goodness sake, what are you complaining about? When they come back, they only pass stupid, unnecessary laws all the time. Encourage them to spend as much time as possible on the beach. It's not that I want them to be there all the time. It's that I want them to be there when the government is doing bad things which need to be restrained, and I want people of the caliber of Gerald Tam Diel and proper MPs like that to stand up in the House and say, this has gone too far. You're arrogating to yourself powers that you should not have, unaccountably, and it's time we debated it properly, and looking around this chamber of zombies, it's time all of you began to earn your rations, because I don't think MPs at the moment are earning their rations.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think they should be paid. I think it's ridiculous that they should be paid and have any status given their complete failure to hold the government to account during the past few months.
But don't you think we are also in a time when we are not governed really by ministers? We're not really governed by MPs anymore. We are now governed by this kind of autocracy of people who are appointed to jobs, like the Chief Medical Officer, like the woman who apparently is in charge of the Information Commissioner, Elizabeth Denham, who apparently has been based in Canada for the best part of the last 3 months, because that's where she decided to work from home from. I mean, it beggars belief, and she's the woman who's meant to be in charge of all the data.
Countries are always run by quite small groups of people. The question is what the restraints are on what they do, and whether and to whom they are responsible, and what happens when they get it wrong.
Yeah.
And the problem,
not very much, it would seem.
Well, what we developed in this country during the 19th century and the early part of the 20th was quite a good system. by which if governments misbehaved, then Parliament could give them a very hard time, and so could the media, and they could be pushed back into line. But now we have a Parliament which is as I say, is a zombie, supine body of people who simply don't seem to understand what they're there for, and a media which, to a great extent, has died.
Yeah,
and there are exceptions. And here we are in one.
Yes.
But
well,
for
interesting.
the most part, I read newspapers which remind me of the Soviet state and Communist Party newspapers that used to be delivered in great grey wodges to my flat in Moscow in the early 1990s. There is no dissent from the basic way in which the country is being run.
Yes, because there was plenty of criticism of the government, but it was kind of what I call pantomime criticism in these press briefings, where ludicrously complicated questions would be asked about why the lockdown wasn't done this way or that way. There was no question of whether it should have been done.
Well, exactly, and and also these people are just showing off. They're just trying to get on TV and get noticed for career purposes,
right.
But they have no interest whatsoever, it seems to me, in most cases, in questioning the government. And there has been, almost from the start, an absence of people saying, "Why are we doing this? Have you done the right thing?" And the same thing is really happening with all this A-level fuss. The fundamental thing is, why were the schools closed?
Yeah. Well, exactly. Why were the exams not held? Also,
stupid mistake. Even on the basis of the COVID believers who actually think that we're in the midst of a terrible plague. Even on that basis, there is no serious evidence that infections have been taking place in schools anywhere. There was no reason to close the schools. It was a complete blunder, and yet all we concentrate on is not the mistake of the closing of the schools, but the mistake subsequently made in trying to manage the closing of the schools.
Right.
Once again, the fundamental question is not asked, and therefore it is not answered.
Also, even if
I have today said, there's no point in worrying about people grabbing my exclusives these days, because nobody else in Fleet Street will follow my stories. But, so I can cheerfully say I have today put in a question to the Department of Health and Social Care saying, how many people, after the quarantine was imposed on travellers returning from Spain, how many people who were quarantined have tested positive for COVID-19? How many have been hospitalised? How many have died?
Very good question.
I've been
asking the same question, but I haven't actually put it to them. But
well, this is the thing. You have to put it to them. But it's tedious because it's getting hold of government press offices in an age when half the civil service is away is itself a struggle. Because always, whenever you ask any government department anything, the first response is, "That's not us. Please ask somebody else."
Yeah.
And this battery of agencies are produced who you're sent on to. But eventually I'll get there. But this question needs to be asked.
But this was the great...
what was going on here, and the same thing will need to be asked about the crazy destruction of tens of thousands of people's longed-for holidays in France, and the ridiculous 4 a.m. deadline by which they had to scramble back into the country. It's actually verging on cruelty. Especially, imagine a family with 2 or 3 young children struggling to get back into this country before the imposition of a quarantine, which might well destroy the livelihood of the father of that family if he didn't make it in time.
And also lots of people in very good faith coming back early from their holidays because they were worried the quarantine would affect their children going back to school. If it was me, I would say, do you know what? You can get stuffed. And if you're going to punish me for not bringing my children back to school because you've imposed a quarantine, that's your problem, not mine.
Well, but in some ways that is the spirit. But the thing is, there isn't any much spirit in this country. I obviously I only see the bits of the country that I see. I travelled into London every day and out again. I get out and about a bit in my own hometown of Oxford and in London itself. And what I see is a huge amount of compliance, particularly with the muzzle decree. And people actually have been told by the government to put muzzles on their faces on the most scrappy evidence. And they've done it.
Yeah. I've just seen a picture.
It's terribly uncomfortable and unpleasant for them all, but they all go around with half their faces invisible to anybody, mumbling to each other, obediently doing what they're told, with no sign whatsoever that they think they've been asked to do something beyond the proper powers of government.
Right, and you're right in saying that the sort of the mission creep, if you like, of people being used to now covering themselves up in such bizarre ways. I'm looking at a picture here. The crew of the MSC Grandioso preparing to sail from Genoa. as an airport testing station in Rome screens passengers. A woman who's wearing a face mask, but you can't actually see what's above that because she's wearing what can only be described as a kind of RoboCop-style crash helmet with sort of ski goggles on it. You literally can't see any part of her face at all.
Well, to be complete, again, if you actually believe the stuff which the government puts out about COVID-19, actually the covering of the eyes is very important. These masks are fundamentally useless because the mucous surfaces of the eyes are a tremendously important site for infection. And if we really did have a major infection danger, we would have to cover our eyes with some sort of mask of that kind. So in a way, what she's doing is taking the government at its word seriously in a way that they don't dare to do because they know perfectly well that first of all, people couldn't afford it. And secondly, people wouldn't stand it. So they concentrate on these cloth nappies, for which there remains no randomized control trial evidence. They concentrate on getting people to wear those because it increases the level of fear and concern, and increases the level in the country, or sustains the level in the country, that we are in the midst of a terrible plague crisis from which we have to be rescued by none other than Alexander Pfeffel Boris Johnson.
But I've asked you this question before, Peter, and I'm not sure I still am satisfied with the answer. Why are they doing it? I mean, what would be the point of a government continually frightening its nation and its populace? What would be the point?
Well, you and I have both made bad mistakes, no doubt, in our careers. Certainly I have. And the first response when you realise that you've blundered is not to go and confess it, is it? The first response is to double down on it and to continue to make the mistake and hope nobody will spot it.
Right.
And
so you think they're being led?
I think they know in their hearts. And I'm sure, actually, I'm sure that people such as Michael Gove in the cabinet know perfectly well this is a total bungle.
Yes, which is why we don't hear much from him these days.
No, almost nothing is heard from him.
No.
I'm sure he knows. I'm sure there are one or two others who have. I suspect the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who also knows that his whole life is going to catch fire in the autumn when the economy goes down the plumbing. But I think that there are people in there who suspect it. Yeah. But they're not going. Their political careers are now tied, lashed to the career of Mr. Johnson, and he is incapable of accepting that he's made a mistake. And the simplest way of carrying on covering up for a mistake is to make it over and over again, deeper and deeper and deeper, and hope that somehow or other you'll come out the other end not too badly damaged. It's what people do. I'm afraid this is if you're ever unlucky enough to be lost in a car with a fool at the wheel, the one thing the fool will never do is admit he's made a mistake on the map and drive back to the starting point and go. He'll go drive round and round looking for some other way of getting to his destination, even if it takes 50 times longer than going back to the point where he made the mistake.
So in a way, this is actually worse than you would have thought, because you made a point this week in your column of saying that you should actually be more angry. People should be more angry about this. But because now what you're saying is that this kind of mad path that the government is pursuing is all just to save face.
Yes, it is. So we are suffering to save the face. And we mock the Oriental cultures, the Chinese and the Japanese, for their face saving. And yet we do it ourselves. And in this case, this is what is going on. And we're being dragged deeper and deeper and deeper into a needless crisis by people who are too proud to admit that they've made a mistake. And I think only anger, I'm not advocating law-breaking or anything unconstitutional, but only anger expressed increasingly about the general direction of it is ever going to change that. I reached a point. You try, but I survived my 2 years in the Soviet Union by turning my sense of humour, which as you well know, doesn't exist.
No, it does. I'm sorry. I think I've uncovered it. That's the shibboleth. I
turned it up to full in the Soviet Union. It was the only way to cope. Absolute max. Because if you didn't, you would actually become extremely unhappy and quite possibly go mad. That's what they did. The place was full of some of the best jokes ever made in the world because that's the way they coped. But it is the point has been reached where I'm afraid I just feel personally now under a sort of strain. I sleep worse.
Really?
I'm more inclined to lose my temper. In general, the whole thing is getting to me in ways that it just is infuriating to see such stupidity, not merely carrying on, but going unchecked, uncriticized. And I'm so angry with so many of my media colleagues for being so feeble. And even, on Saturday I had to endure an article by Deborah Ross in the Times saying that people who didn't wear face nappies on trains were horrible people. She doesn't know anything about the issue at all, as far as I can see.
No, exactly right. That is the problem.
But this thing gets prominent position in one of the most important newspapers in the country, and actually, I'm not bothered if someone comes up to me and says, "Why aren't you wearing a mask?" I can explain, but there are a lot of people who don't want to wear these things, who are afraid of being persecuted in public if they don't.
And many of them are saying...
In my view, this sort of thing will increase that.
Yeah, and many of them are saying that's partly why, for example, and you've pointed this out before, they're not coming back to work because they don't wish to wear a mask to get on a train. Therefore, they just won't get on the train, or they don't wish to...
It's one of many reasons. I think but it's either you take the yoke, either you say, right, I'm wearing this public declaration that I support the government's policy and that I am fundamentally prepared to be humiliated by the government, and that's the sort of person I am, or you won't do it.
Yeah.
That's why I make such an issue out of it, because it is actually quite important that it isn't just a piece of cloth.
Yeah.
It is a piece of cloth which proclaims, it might as well say on it, I support Alexander de Pfeffel, Boris Johnson and his stupid government and everything that it does. I'm not prepared to wear a badge of that kind on any part of my anatomy.
And you did say once...
Let alone my face, which is now adorned, I should say, by what I think is the best of my three beards.
It's a very good beard, I have to say.
Well, kind of you to say
to blow smoke, as they say. But listen, you did say once to me that you thought, out of politeness, you would wear a face covering when you were asked to in certain situations. Are you saying you don't do that anymore?
Yeah, what I did when this thing began was I treated these people who seemed to me to have gone collectively crazy as if they were a new religion among us. And so, for instance, in supermarkets, to begin with, I did once. I wrapped a scarf around my face. That's a Zorro.
Yeah.
Out of respect for them.
Right.
Because I thought, well, I respect other religions without believing in them. But that was before the compulsion element came in.
Yeah. Because that does change things, doesn't it?
To me, it changes it completely. And I put out a tweet last week, and I said, if you ever wondered how you would have reacted, what position you would have taken during all the great crises and controversies of the last 100 or so years, now you know. And so most people conform. Most people do, and this is what people do. This is a country where we make rude jokes about the number of French people who collaborated with their occupiers. What do you think we would have done if we'd been occupied by people who shot and tortured anyone who came? But we don't even need to be shot and tortured, do we? We just need somebody to say, we'll fine you 50 quid if you don't wear.
Well, I mean, it's now they're threatening.
And on it goes.
Now they're threatening to fine you £3,000. Are you? I mean, I can't really see that happening, because why would they wish to create, a public order problem? Because in your case, if they tried to fine you £3,000 on the spot, I suspect you would not comply with that.
Well, I'm not going into that. I mean, I think they would be legally in a very poor position if they tried to do it at all. But because actually the British law on this, or the English law on this, to be more specific, is actually quite open to allow dissent, which people could use if they wanted to. And this is the amazing thing: people don't. But they're saying this to look tough. They know perfectly well that the levels of compliance are extremely high.
Yeah.
They don't. It's just done in much in the way that Priti Patel pretends to be tough on immigration. It's just done to look tough, not to be tough.
Yeah.
To actually mobilize the police to go around grabbing everybody in the street who wasn't wearing a muzzle and dragging them in and forcing them to pay fines. They're not going to do that.
Yeah, but then let me take you back to where we started, where you've got Italian military people hanging out of planes with binoculars, staring at people on a beach to see whether they're not lying on a sunbed.
Well, you have to ask yourself, as with all photographs, like all those pictures of mass graves and huge piles of coffins and all the rest of it that we saw at the beginning of this, how do these pictures come to be taken?
Well, presumably there's a press guy in the plane.
Yeah, and who asked him up? I mean, you try and get a trip in a military plane normally.
Yeah.
Well, what happens.
Listen, I had the misfortune of spending about 10 hours in a Hercules flying over Bosnia, dropping military meals out of a US Air Force plane.
Yeah, it didn't make much of a photograph either, did it? But I went
No,
out
it was
to the
dark.
pub. Exactly. my trip in a Shackleton over the North Sea.
Yeah.
Not much of a photograph of that. But no, the point is, any photograph like that, you have to ask yourself, how did it come to be taken? And the answer is, obviously, these things are arranged.
Yeah.
It's the idea that if the Italian Air Force spots somebody out of line on the beach, the plane is going to swoop low, and from loudspeakers on its wings, terrible imprecations going. Well, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's terribly surreal. Though. I mean,
it creates an atmosphere of surveillance, which gullible people, and there are a lot of gullible people.
There really are.
Will fall for.
Yeah. There really are. I mean, I've been fortunate in as much as I have not yet been driven mad by this whole business, because I've never really had any trust or faith in any government. I've never really relied upon them to rule my life and make it better or worse or anything else. So I think that's kind of somehow saved me from what you're going through. But I can only counsel you to try and just not worry about it.
Oh, I have to worry about it. It's not the thing is, as I keep stressing, my own life is one of great good fortune, and I'm probably largely left alone. But I do grieve for the country. You sit down, you read George Orwell's thoughts about the English people. This is a country where people say, you can't run me in for that. You can't do that here. And these statements were true, and it simply was the case until quite recently. That it really was different here. The government did have more limited powers over us than practically anywhere else in the world. And it's vanishing before our eyes, and nobody cares. I have to be upset by that, surely. If I weren't upset by that, there'd be something wrong with me.
Okay. Well, that's a good point at which to end, Peter. Thank you, as ever. A very interesting conversation once more with Peter Hitchens, Mail on Sunday columnist. He'll be back same time next Monday, of course. Maybe you're like him. You're angry about what's going on, or maybe you're like me. I'm just kind of resigned to it. I try not to let it affect me. I try not to get too miserable about it. Which one of those are you?